I have very controversial takes on this. Like, number one, in the bird. I mean, it's stuffing. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Housing Insiders. We have a special episode today, so I'm going to bypass our usual intro, and I'm not going to tell you what we're doing. In general, I'm just going to say that today is our Thanksgiving episode, so there's going to be a lot of giving of thanks and a lot of eating on today's episode. But in the meantime, I'm Jonathan Lawless.
And I'm Jeremy Potter. John, I'm really glad we're doing a special edition of Housing Insiders. We've been spending the last few years trying to record conversations about how to make housing innovative, how to make it attainable, how to send ideas around both the policy landscape, the product landscape. And so today we get to sit back and have a little fun with everything that we've talked about, thought about, or want to talk about throughout the year. So this is exciting.
Yeah, it'll definitely be exciting for us. I hope it's as exciting for our listeners. And I want to kick things off by, doing a quick moment of thanks. We have some incredible people that help us make this happen. Caroline Cooper, who's our producer, Max, who's our awesome editor, so on and so forth, whatever you want to call them. Amazing folks. And I'm so thankful for their help. But also I'm thankful for the fact that people actually take time out of their day to listen to us. I know there's a lot of podcasts out there. I for sure struggle to keep up with them, but I'm so grateful that people actually take the time to listen to us.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline and Max. Thank you for listening. Cheers to you, John, and thank you, everybody, for continuing to let us do this.
So one thing I thought we'd start with at the beginning, you mentioned something interesting to me, and obviously Thanksgiving is a time where we think about giving as well. We have Giving Tuesday coming up soon, and your wife's involved in a really interesting project. So maybe we could kick it off. You tell us a little bit about that, and maybe make a pitch for people to donate.
Yes, thank you. We love our sponsors here on Housing Insiders. So we thought for this episode, we'd flip the script a little bit and mention some ways that you can get involved with charities or other organizations who are doing amazing things. And DBG Detroit is an after-school program focused on the entire family, the entire community, starting with students. And the scholars come after school and they get a coach, a mentor, they get their tutoring for getting work done. Some athletic ability. Actually, when the program started, the founder actually found that boxing was his exit from the street, his way of getting pulled out of the street and into self-development. And so Kali Sweeney found boxing to be the athletic endeavor that he chose. These students can choose boxing. They don't have to, but it's a holistic part of their day. So you get your work done first, you get that some sort of physical or athletic event, you get a hot meal and a van ride home. And so students 8 to 18 in Detroit come to DBG Detroit, and they are obviously trying to grow that program with more teachers, more coaches, more students in the program under the roof. And then obviously someday expand the roof and make it even bigger so that more kids and more cities can have things like DBG Detroit. So if you are looking for supporting the kids of Detroit this year on Giving Tuesday, we'll put a link in there and check out DBG Detroit.
That's awesome. I love what they're doing, and it's easy to give these days. Go online, give $20. It's for a good cause, and it'll make you feel good, and you'll feel better than it will keeping the $20 and spending it on something worthless on Amazon. So Jeremy, thanks for sharing. Okay, so we've got kind of a plan for today's episode. This is completely Jeremy's idea, which I love, and so we're going to kind of talk about the Thanksgiving meal, because many of you are meal planning right now, or hopefully have already planned a meal. And we're going to sort of make that the theme. Am I saying that right, Jeremy?
I like to think of it as the theme because sometimes, we all have our opinions, and I want yours on all the different categories of what makes Thanksgiving special for you and your family. And then within those categories, it feels like a lot of the stories and topics that we talk about, they have different sizes, right? We talk about the housing crisis. Well, that's giant. That's enormous. And then there's ideas. We talk to innovators and startup founders. We talk to policymakers and regulators who are working on some specific piece of this giant problem. So it kind of lends itself to a Thanksgiving meal, we thought. Or we'll see. We'll see if you agree with us.
All right. So what's the menu look like?
All right. So when you think about the things that I think about that make Thanksgiving special, you got your appetizer, or you definitely have something out before the meal when everybody's watching football, catching up, maybe tossing a football around the backyard while the turkey's cooking. And so we'll start with the appetizer. We'll kind of go through those pre-dinner traditions if your family has them. We'll talk drinks, side dishes. Where there's always strong opinions on the side dishes, the cranberry sauce, how you like your turkey done, and obviously dessert, a big part of the holidays, and especially Thanksgiving. So I figured we would go through that entire meal one by one, topic by topic, but we'd also say and learn from each other about what your family does. So if we can, John, let's start with that appetizer. I figured that's a good place to start. Seems like a natural kicking off point.
I will say by forewarning, by the time people are done with the Thanksgiving meal, they're usually over full and tired. So I just maybe grab a cup of coffee as we kick things off with the appetizer.
Yeah, we'll make it snappy and try to keep the energy level up so you don't have the nap that you need on the couch after this podcast. Well, when I'm at Thanksgiving, John, my aunt and uncle just outside of Philadelphia in Bucks County, they hosted, and they host every year. And so I used to make it every year. I try to make it back from Detroit as often as possible. And my aunt Margaret makes a cheese ball. I always love the cheese ball. It's enormous. You kind of create a bunch of different cheeses. You roll them in nuts and parsley, and then you eat them with Triscuits. Triscuits is my favorite. So a spreadable cheese, but really fun to watch the Lions play at 12:30. So I hope everybody's watching the Lions this year. And I'll have my aunt's cheese ball recipe. So I'll make it even if I don't make it back to her house. And I figured my appetizer topic for today with my cheese ball was the ground lease. And I've been hearing a lot about the ground lease this year, and so it felt to me like it was a big enough deal to justify something that I look forward to, my appetizer, my aunt's recipe, watching football, this and that. But the ground lease has really, I think, been promoted by two companies in particular, Cedar and Jubilee. And there's really big benefits to this. It's obviously, at first glance, a way to dramatically change the price of a house, right? Leasing the land to Cedar or Jubilee and buying the improvements on the land, i.e., the house, means in some cases you can cut the cost of acquiring a home by 50%, depending on where it is and what the breakdown is between the land and the house. And so, it wasn't in my, I'll stick with the theme here for a second, John. It's not a big enough idea that it's going to change the entire meal. It's not going to change everything for everybody in every community from an affordable housing perspective. But I talk to lenders, they say it's already approved by Fannie and Freddie. You can already do ground leases. They're going to continue to expand to be GSE eligible, to be eligible perhaps with state housing agencies and things like that. So this is one of those topics where if you're trying to get in at a lower price point, earn some equity on something in the market, it seems like the ground lease is like a small but meaningful way in that took on a lot more prominence this year.
Yeah, it's a great one. It's been an interesting week for me, and I'll sprinkle some of these comments throughout the meal. I've been with several members of Congress the last week. I was at Fannie Mae, talking to a lot of folks at Fannie Mae. In fact, this ground lease idea came up, and somebody actually mentioned to me, and I was completely unaware of this, but I want to say Palm Springs, maybe not, maybe someplace in Florida, there are plots of land that are still owned by Native Americans. And on these plots of land, because of the nature of Native American lands, where you can't foreclose on the land, they do effectively a ground lease, a 99-year lease, where people buy the structure on top of the lease, and it makes it more affordable in those particular things. So I think it's a really great idea. It's an idea that's really, I mean, surprisingly common in like places like the UK. It has its downsides, and I know Jeremy, you and I, as we've sort of thought about some of these companies like Cedar and Jubilee that are doing this kind of structure. It's like the sort of optics of a fund coming in and buying land and then making it cheaper to buy a home. It sort of feels like feudalism in a weird way. I think that's kind of the downside. And there's also some questions with the GSEs in terms of, is it technically eligible by the GSEs, which is actually, that question got asked to them directly, and they were surprisingly unaware of the structure. But in any case, I think it's a really interesting one. I'll pivot to my appetizer, Jeremy,
Please.
unless you want to respond to that.
Yeah, no, I think this is a so we're working on this, and the structure's working so well, so far. So let's go to your appetizer, your favorite appetizer, and what topic you wanna lead us off with.
All right. So I will say, just by way of Thanksgiving, I don't have a very solid tradition. My parents have passed. I have my in-laws. We've often done friendsgivings instead, and honestly, it's great to do that because things change up, and while you miss the sort of tradition aspect of it, you get the sort of variety of being with new friends in different environments. So I will say, like, just to stick to the cheese theme, in our day and age, fancy cheese is always going to be your appetizer. Like if it's a play date or whatever it is, it's either Cheez-Its or brie. And so some combination of goldfish and brie and the like are going to be my favorite appetizers to kick things off. So I'm going to actually do some, since our appetizers are similar, cheese ball and cheese. I'm actually going to mention something which was really interesting today. So Andy Barr spoke at the Exchequer today. Andy Barr, congressman from Kentucky, running for Senate in Kentucky, incredible guy, really thoughtful about housing. He all of a sudden said, one of the best ideas I've heard about housing is this company called Homium. And I was like, what? Amazing. And so Jeremy and I both are familiar with this company. Homium is what you would consider like a home equity investment or a shared equity or shared appreciation firm. They do something similar. They try to make housing cheaper by splitting up the ownership structure of the home. What Homium does much better than anyone else out there in terms of like being fair to the consumer is they don't ratchet up the percentage of the future appreciation that they get in return for investing. Again, it's a shared appreciation product, but it's focused on sort of impact investing, very much like the California Dream for All, which if you haven't followed, you should definitely check out that program. So I was just surprised at how, I mean, in a 40 minutes or Q&A, and Congressman Barr just was like, this is a great idea, has real potential to lower costs of entry. There are ways the federal government can help the model, and I agree. I think all these models of splitting up ownership and making it cheaper to get in, get that first rung on the ladder, I think are really interesting.
Yeah, that's gonna make our friends, Tommy Mercine and Marcus Martin very happy to hear that their message is taking effect on the Hill and with decision makers. I love the idea here as well to add to your Friendsgiving theme that, this is a really important investment for anybody who wants real estate exposure to understand. Because, I was talking to somebody this week, John, about putting the piece that Homium buys, that second lien investment in your house, putting that next to RMBS makes a lot of sense. You have a debt option that returns between 4.5 or 5.5%, and you have an equity option that returns a projected 4.5, 5.5%. So it actually gives you some flexibility in the same return profile, and one's debt and one's equity. And I think that means that it can go. We just have to find the investors who realize that and have the portfolios to back it up.
Yeah, man. All right, take us to our next part of our Thanksgiving day.
Well, you have your appetizer. The turkey's not quite ready yet. So, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was at Friendsgiving or on that day, what my family, my uncle and aunt lived close enough that we could actually watch the Macy's Day Parade. And as soon as we saw Santa finishing out the Macy's Day Parade and I call it the Macy's Day Parade. I know you're supposed to call it the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, but it's the Macy's Day Parade to me.
Yeah,
As soon as we saw Santa and the parade, we could jump in the car and be at my uncle's house about 90 minutes later, 2 hours later, something like that. And, so the parade's one. Some people do turkey trots, the 5K in the morning.
God bless him.
My dad always listened to Alice's Restaurant at noon on Thanksgiving. I don't know if you're familiar with that song, but it's an Arlo Guthrie song about Thanksgiving that a lot of radio stations will play in its entirety at noon.
Amazing.
Obviously, touch football we mentioned, people watch NFL football. So I just thought maybe, we could talk a little bit here about traditions or things that you like about the day early on before you get to the food.
Those are great. What parallel and traditions do you have for us in terms of housing topics?
Well, the one here is that we always hear about is financial literacy. We always hear this should be taught in schools. Why aren't they teaching it in schools? And so I was just going to call back to a previous episode and say one of these kind of like overarching things that we can do and that we want to do is make homeownership more accessible and understood. We had Kristen Messerly on First Home IQ. And so my thought here was to call back to that episode and say, what can we do to actually put this information inside the places where consumers already are, right? Where are they already? We know we have a tradition of home ownership. We have a tradition of the American dream. I'm sure this is not the first time the American dream is going to come up on this episode, right? So we have this long-standing tradition. We are trying to get a generation that we're losing to understand that this is still an opportunity to desire home ownership, get on the path to home ownership. A lot of the ideas we're going to talk about today are ways to incentivize it. But for me, the thought was supporting First Home IQ is kind of step one, but really putting that information and those tools and those calculators and a lot of that into the rental platforms, right? What you're doing at Built as a great example, put them into personal savings apps, putting them in the places where people already live, work, and play so that it's actually a natural part of the home shopping and saving experience. So this isn't a product idea. This is a pitch for, if we want to keep this tradition alive, making homeownership the cornerstone of the American dream, we actually have to do a better job as an industry. I think, as you know, I think the mortgage industry does a terrible job actually putting the story behind homeownership in the right places where it's natural for people to consume it. And so, for my pre-dinner tradition, I already mentioned the Macy's Day Parade and Arlo Guthrie's Alice's Restaurant. I just wanted to add that those are kind of really authentic pieces of American tradition, and so's homeownership. And we really have to do a better job getting First Home IQ and getting tools and calculators like that into other places where consumers and renters are already living their lives.
Yeah, it's a great point, and another Giving Tuesday idea is to look up First Home IQ and see if you can get involved in their ambassador program. Actually, that episode often comes back to my mind because of the ways that younger people are using AI. And I'll tell you a story. And for those that are listening in the car with your kids, time to skip ahead a little bit because this will be very inappropriate. But I just recently downloaded Grok, and if you haven't downloaded Grok, Grok has added a new feature called Companions. And so, one of the most disturbing things in AI is the fact that people are using AI as relationships, professional advice. Like, well, what Elon Musk has done, and will be no surprise for those who follow Elon Musk, but he has created these like scantily clad, sexy anime characters that you can just like hang out with, literally just have a conversation with. Of course, I had to try it just to see what it was like.
Of
It
course.
was very bizarre, this like little blonde anime character telling me how awesome I am. And you could see how it's a super addictive thing. I say all of that just because I do think there's an opportunity. And again, that this will come back to your point. There are ways that people consume information that's rapidly changing. And I think if we can support the ways of getting it into those methods, it'll work. Now, whether or not it's a stripper anime character who's going to talk to you about what an escrow account is, I don't know. That doesn't seem like it's going to work for many people, but there might be a different type of anime character that you could talk to.
You know what it makes me think of, John? It's not that different than what Adam McKay tried to do in The Big Short, right? Hey, you're not going to listen to a professor talk about this, but you might listen to a professor playing blackjack talk about this, or you might listen to Margot Robbie in the bathtub talk about this. So we're all kind of circling the same thing, which is how do you get people's attention in the attention economy? In The Big Short, they did it that way. Grok is doing it that way. So housing has to step up and think about what's going to be our hook. How are
Yep.
we going to create our version of that hook?
I totally agree. Well, my tradition is pretty simple. We've always been a Macy's Day Parade watcher, and so it feels very odd to watch an event that existed before TV existed because it was a way of having real entertainment for a lot of people. But like now we just watch it. I always find it strange to watch it, but watch a
Well, one of
parade.
the things that changed since we moved to Detroit, John, was that Detroit has a full parade with floats and the balloons, the giant balloons. And so now it's the only other one I've seen on Thanksgiving that's equivalent to the Macy's Day Parade. So I've been able to go now a lot of times and actually see a real life Thanksgiving parade, so that's kinda cool. So if you're in
I
Detroit,
mean, I
check
bet
that
that
out.
sounds about parades actually sound really boring to me. I mean, I don't there's a lot of, like, really interesting things to go watch and see, but, like, big balloons passing you by, I don't know. I'm not,
Yeah, I hear you. I think it's also, there's a lot of downtime, between the
yeah.
things that makes it tough. So the kids like it, but, you're right, you gotta know what you're in for.
Well, and look, I'm surprised you didn't mention the Lions play on Thanksgiving, which has gotta be a Detroit, I watch a little football, but just I don't care about the teams, but certainly you do. So all right, so in talking about traditions, I couldn't help but bring up one of the most well-known traditions in the housing finance sector, which is talking about GSE reform. I think for many people, probably many of our listeners, they've probably spent most of their career hearing year after year proposals about GSE reform. It just so happens the day we're recording this yesterday, Bill Ackman went on to talk about his proposal for GSE reform. And I mean, despite the fact that he clearly is going to make a ton of money getting these guys relisted or whatever, I thought his proposal was really good. It all hinges, however, on this idea that the Treasury put a bunch of money into Fannie and Freddie. They've been paid back, quote unquote. Now, paid back either means they've been earning dividends on their investment and they still have an investment, or it means they were paid back and they no longer really have an investment because they were paid off of their investment. So there's a debate about which is which. And we're not talking about a small amount of money. It's like $200 billion at this point. But his proposal starts with that. That just gets canceled. Like, hey, you paid us back. You no longer owe us this money, and that allows for everything else to happen. Look, I mean, there's no good answer here, and everyone is a skeptic about anything actually happening because I think for the very fundamental reason of there's really little upside to privatizing the GSEs, and there's a lot of potential downside and a lot of complexity involved in it. And I don't know how anybody would care to try to do something in that direction. It needs to get done. I'll say that so nobody can quote me as saying that it'll never get done. But it's just the reality is we will be doing this tradition maybe as long as we do the Macy's Days Parade tradition.
I think you're I think you're right to say that it is a tradition, and we've been, saying both that it should happen and that it's not gonna happen for a really long time. Here's my 2 cents, which is I would be very surprised if it was just canceled despite the fact that we do think that the amount of money collected by the Treasury and the dividend, so-called dividend, it does pay back the anticipated cost of what, taking over the GSEs meant that many years ago. The longer we stay like this, John, I actually think though the more likely it is to never change, to be honest. Some of these things can just become cemented in. We've heard recently from guests on the podcast that new members of Congress don't even really know a world where Fannie and Freddie weren't under conservatorship. They're learning about Fannie and Freddie as they assume their seat in Congress. So the farther we get away from this, the more likely it is to be like, why do we have to change anything? Just let's just keep making money for the Treasury and spending it on things, including housing. I think that if I was going to try to move them out slowly, the IPO version is about as close as the thing that makes sense to me. Not looking under the hood at all the intricacies of the legal aspects of the agreements. I'm saying just rational thinking about markets, 5 to 10% of each entity over a long period of time starts to add up to 25% sold, and then eventually 40% is sold, eventually 50% is sold, eventually 65% is sold, and it doesn't have to happen as one moment. We'll see it as tranches that are percentages until such time as the numbers that private capital needs to bring to the table to buy the shares start to even out to what the entities are worth and continue to be worth, because as we all know, most investors look at stocks for their future value and not their current value by and large. That's why Tesla is more valuable than Ford, Toyota, and GM put together. It's a future value belief by investors. We're going to see the same thing here, and it's going to take 3 years or whatever, 2.5 years, and we'll do 5 or 10% at a time.
We shall see.
So that's a pretty meaty topic, John. That wasn't our main course, but certainly, as you said, it kind of is a shadow that lingers behind everything all the time in terms of housing finance in the Beltway.
It's a tradition. That's a
It's a
tradition.
tradition. So, I'd like to ask you, about our next step here in the day and the meal. While you're having appetizers and watching football or watching parade, you're usually starting, to think about apple cider, glass of wine, cocktail, leading up to the meal. So I made drinks a separate category in our menu today, and I was curious, is it a separate category, and do you have a cocktail in your hand right now or one that will be in your hand on Thanksgiving Day?
I have a cocktail in my hand right now, and there will be one on Thanksgiving Day. And I don't know about you, but part of the joy of Thanksgiving is it's a long meal, and that means you can drink lots of drinks, and then you sleep it off. At 6 p.m. or whatever. So yes, drinks and the drink menu and the pairing to me is a very important part of the meal.
Yeah, so whether it's, your cocktail, your old fashioned or a martini or something like that, or a glass of wine, we'll start with you. What's your topic, that is the beverage, drink, cocktail topic of the day?
Yeah, well, I'll start by with the friendsgiving thing. I like to make cocktails, and so I'm often like bringing a specialty cocktail to the meal. I'm working on mine for this Thanksgiving, but last year it was a persimmon old fashioned. I did not know what a persimmon was until I did this recipe. Apparently, there's a type of persimmon that is only ripe in November, so you really only get it in November. It's a weird little tomato looking like thing that kind of tastes like a pear and an orange mixed together. So it's a anyway. Others might be more familiar with persimmon, but I made a persimmon syrup to make an old fashioned with. So it was a persimmon old fashioned with sort of a pretty little persimmon sitting on the top, and it turned out incredibly well. It was a really great drink.
Oh, that does sound delicious. Yeah, I being from the Northeast, like, being from growing up in Pennsylvania and being from the Northeast, living in the Midwest now, I always think of, like, the flavors of the season, and so, like, in my mind, I was imagining a maple old fashioned because 'cause I've had one of those, and that kind of brings in some of the fall flavors, but the persimmon old fashioned now is one I wanna try, so we'll have to that sounds delicious.
It's got some good fall colors. I want to talk about something. I don't know if I can relate it to drinks, but I
That's
will,
okay.
which is Ivory Innovations. And we had Jenna Louie on the podcast to announce, I think that if I remember, as the top 10 in the Ivory Prize competition. They just held their annual event in Salt Lake City. I was there. I was fortunate enough to moderate an amazing group of people on a panel about policy innovation. Ivory is becoming a true powerhouse. Don't sleep on Ivory. I think what they're doing and the fact that they combine a builder with this sort of innovation channel that's tied to the university. I mean, these guys are doing some amazing things. And the persimmon old fashioned has a reddish color, so maybe it'll tie to this. They've put together a little red book, and Clark Ivory, the founder of Ivory Homes, and obviously the funder of Ivory Innovations, his view is like, let's just make it simple for localities to fix zoning issues, and just put together a little playbook of like easy to do, high impact concepts. It is incredible. So I've actually ordered a whole bunch of copies so that I can give them out while I'm on the hill. What I love about it is it just takes a really complicated thing that lots of cities and states struggle with, like where do I start? What should my priority be? And just boils it down into this little red book. Amazingly well done. That's my drink.
Oh, right on. That's great, and also that's cool because, we can promote that, share it, and give that out. So that's yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things, John, that motivated us to start Housing Insiders, honestly, was to do a better job connecting the dots between parts of the industry. Right? We knew that there were groups like Ivory working on things. I think of the Turner Center as well that we've partnered with that are working on things that don't necessarily get into all the aspects of real estate, mortgage, title, home building, insurance, all the different ways that housing touches all of these different things. And so that's a great example. I love it.
Yeah. What are you drinking?
So for my drink, I want to throw out an idea to you on it's non-agency approvals specifically for cash flow underwriting. So or any type of underwriting. I wanted to propose a thought here, and maybe it's because it's cash flow, and that was my thinking, or maybe just in you kinda have to be a little buzzed to throw out ideas like this, I guess, so maybe this fits that category for 2 reasons, but I don't understand why we haven't done a better job credit modeling to prove to investors and rating agencies that these different ideas that we know should work and can be proven with AI and other big data science models without needing a 5-year history of actual loans. And I wanted to ask you what you thought about this idea, which is often when something, I just saw some breaking news, Rocket rolled out a DSCR loan. Well, the funny thing about calling that breaking news is most other lenders, non agency lenders especially, have had one for a long time. UWM's had one since 2023. But here in 2025, Rocket comes around and announces it. So, DSCR loan is the income cash flow of a rental property is calculated into the underwriting so that you can approve a mortgage on an investment property, a rental property. Well, that's not that different than what you and I have talked about underwriting ADUs as additional rental income on a primary property, as well as a entire menu of non-agency product that we want to see grow with the Redwood Trusts and many other of those secondary market investors and loan buyers. I mentioned one, but there's plenty. And yet we still have to go through the process of, well, we can't get it approved for securitization. So you have to hold it for 3 years. You have to look at the data. Meanwhile, I look around outside of mortgage and we seem to have incredibly robust data modeling and credit modeling. You with AI and data science, we should be able to model 100 million market scenarios with a portfolio of loans and then show the cone of probability like a hurricane or something and then give that to portfolios, hedge funds, regulators, rating agencies and say, look, we now know the playing field. We've now modeled it out to a very high degree of certainty if you believe what engineers are telling us about what AI and data science is capable of, and then start producing that product in a more scaled and cost effective way than adding the 200 to 300 basis points and doing it as a very niche product and then hoping that the high price and some aggressive sales gets us enough at bats that we have enough proof over many years to get that thing approved. And I just think that we're not well equipped, but we should be using what I'm hearing about AI and data science to actually run these scenarios and see if some of the loans that we'd like to consider, including self employed and cash flow type first mortgages, let's get them going faster. And let's do it using the tools that other industries are using to show both risk and return.
You said so many really interesting things there. It's going to be hard to respond to all of them. And I just will say, I think your head's in the right place. There's been an interesting jump in non-QM recently, and I think maybe it's sort of the capital markets. The spreads are a little bit better. Your main thesis, which maybe I would sort of say this way, there's some common sense ways you think about underwriting somebody that are unverifiable by data. And when I say unverifiable by data, it means typically people want to see not just history, but bad history. Because when you're doing the mortgage business, most things are fine. In most environments, there's not a lot of delinquencies. You don't see any bad behavior. So you don't know what makes a difference.
That's
So
right.
really what everyone's saying is we want there to be a crisis for your product to make sense. I mean,
Yeah,
it's so fucking stupid. Instead of just wanting to respect your common sense, we want to hope there's a crisis. Anyway, I think at the end of the day, it's basically we can't verify this because we haven't had a crisis. We don't want to engage with something that's common sense because we don't want to take the risk, and instead we can use this as a way of kind of kicking the can. And when you pilot stuff, I mean, again, you pilot it with all these restrictions and do 10 loans, you're never going to learn anything. There's never a crisis. Hopefully there's not a crisis that'll help you test it, and we don't end up anywhere good. But I mean, to your point, if I'm underwriting somebody who's buying a home as an investment property, I don't care where their income comes from. I care about the property and its ability to generate income, period. And that makes a lot of sense. And start conservative. I don't care where you start. That seems like a much better way to underwrite loans. But we're stuck in this environment where the GSEs are they're never going to consider it. And the easy way to not consider it is we'll do it once you show us the data.
that's right. Yeah, well said. All right, so let's move on. Now we're at the main we're at the main dinner, the main event, I should say. We're at the main event and I kind of wanted to start with the most fun part of the Thanksgiving meal for me. And that's the side dishes. I know we'll get to turkey, and turkey is the star of the show from a cliche perspective, but the actual fun stuff is the mashed potatoes, the sweet potatoes, whatever certain recipes you have for your green beans. And then, of course, the stuffing controversy, stuffing inside the bird, stuffing outside the bird, how you like your stuffing. There's all kinds of opinions there. So I figured for side dishes, we would have some real action here because of, at least from my experience. So is that a good characterization of side dishes, John, or what do you think?
Oh, man, amen, yeah, it's,
Yeah.
in some ways, I think they're the star of the show, not the turkey, but yeah, I agree, it's,
Excellent. So my side dish that I make when I'm here, or my dad and mother made, but my dad now makes when we go to the family Thanksgiving, is a sweet potato casserole sort of, but it's really just sweet potato, mashed sweet potatoes with a topping, and that topping is the brown sugar and a little bit of maple syrup and the walnuts crushed up, so that you get kind of the sweet crunchy top with the creamy mashed sweet potatoes underneath. Absolutely fan favorite. My daughter now loves it. We make it every year, no matter where we are, and I'll be making it again this year. I absolutely love that as my side dish.
no marshmallows?
With no marshmallows on ours, and I think my dad will accommodate marshmallow fans and put half
Wow,
marshmallows sometimes, because there are big marshmallow fans. It's just that's not the way I take it.
that's where my kids are,
Yeah, right on.
um, they want the marshmallows, not the vegetable below it.
So for my side dish, I'm gonna do a little bit of a literal use of side dish, but I'm also gonna stay in mortgage for a second. And what I have been trying to figure out is one of the policy papers that really had an effect on me. This is now going back to probably like 2019. The Chase Institute released a paper that was liquidity over equity, and they had done an analysis of JP Morgan Chase savings customers, checking account and savings account customers who applied for a mortgage with the bank. So their population could only be if you had an account with the bank and you applied for a mortgage with the bank. But that's a pretty decent number at a place like Chase Bank. And what they found was that anyone who had two or more mortgage payments saved up in cash in one of those accounts, checking or savings, was a lower risk at all LTVs than someone who put more down. In other words, being liquid is safer than having equity in your house. Pretty straightforward concept, but at the time, not one we were talking a lot about. And I've been talking about it ever since. And here's what I want to ask you about side dishes. We don't put any cash accounts or reserve accounts with mortgages in an organic way that makes the homeowner less risky, or that can be adjusted for things like, and I'll say risk first, but also things like gifts or contributions. And so, what I'm going to propose for my side dish is that we actually start reframing the mortgage so that the down payment does not go into the home in the traditional sense of equity. And instead, we start accepting parents' cash. We start accepting other types of collateral like stock or cash accounts as acceptable collateral for a down payment. And what do I mean by that? I mean, you can get a 100 LTV loan, so to speak, that looks and feels like an 80 LTV loan. You get 80 LTV pricing, and that 20% that would traditionally just go right into the house, make the seller whole. In this case, the mortgage company, the bank, the GSEs are making the seller whole, and the bank gets to keep the cash in a high yield savings account like a CD, or in a rainy day fund, or is escrowing stock or other valuables that only get liquidated when you fuck up and miss a payment. So if you don't, you do not get penalized for that cash or that stock. You don't have to liquidate your assets. You hold your assets at the bank, you hold your assets with your financial advisor, or the parents do, but you get credit for it. And only those who don't make a payment end up being the ones that we punish, not punished. I'm putting that in air quotes, but only the people who miss a payment have the liquidation effect. Today, we're doing liquidation effect across 100% of applicants. Every loan officer will tell you, every bank will tell you, sell the stock, get that parent money and get a gift letter, give it to the seller. And what I'm saying is, let's make the seller whole with the loan, and let's use that money and that cash for valuable other things like interest at the bank can lend it out, or for that rainy day account for a first time home buyer. If something does happen, they can tap into it and use it to repair the hot water heater or the roof. And only the people who miss the payment end up having the liquidation.
I mean, it's a really fascinating first time I've heard you mention that, Jeremy, and I think it's really interesting. I wanna say a couple things on the idea, but then also in response to it. So, one of the challenges is instead of having an 80 LTV loan, you have a 100 LTV loan, so your payment's higher. And a lot of the reason that there's a down payment is not so much to make the bank happy, but it's to make the loan balance smaller. So that's just a little nuance, but and you're paying more money, in some ways you're kind of paying for your money to sit in an account to be able to back you up. This is a really important point. I want to really put an exclamation point on this, okay? Because I don't think people in the mortgage industry realize this. Part of that JP Morgan research basically showed that if you are able to get people through a short term liquidity crunch, they will perform. And that's what that small amount of reserves does. Like it gives you a few months to get back on your feet. That insight has really been confirmed by the introduction of the deferral mod as a modification solution. You can miss some payments, we'll add them to your balance. You don't have to pay anything extra. You just get a break from your mortgage. The deferral mod has been, in my opinion, the most impactful thing on mortgage performance since the change in the underwriting regimes in 2008. In fact, the GSEs are probably significantly overcapitalized because in a stress scenario, if they can deploy the deferral mod, which they never had in a previous stress scenario, they will fix so many of the issues by giving people a break that the ultimate losses will be significantly lower. And I think what you're getting at is how do we create a mechanism for that? That's one way. The other mechanism that I've thought a lot about too is there an insurance product that allows people to get the deferral mod more effectively than what servicers are able to distribute. Because part of the problem with the deferral mod is only 40% of people that should get it are getting it because it's very complicated to get a hold of somebody and make sure the waterfall works, whatever it is. But if you could make it more likely that they have access to liquid funds when they're struggling to make their mortgage payment, you will save them and you will save the industry a huge amount of money. And I think you're hitting on something that's super important and creating another way of thinking about how to do it, which I think is amazing.
Right on. I think this idea that you just said is kind of fundamental to how I've continued to try to build on this idea, which is let's use resources to their highest best use. If we have access to cash, let's figure out a way to make more use of it than driving it into the house. And there's probably ways to do it. So it needs a little bit more refinement, but there we are on, the ultimate goal. So side
Yeah.
dishes, what's your preference, your personal preference on your favorite side dish, and what's your topic?
So I'm going to my side dish answer would have been the same as yours with marshmallows. So I'm going to ignore that one and say stuffing is a very important thing for me personally. And I have very controversial takes on this. Like number one, in the bird. I mean, it's stuffing. I mean, you can make some
Loses
out of the
its
bird. That's
name
fine.
otherwise.
Yes, in the bird. And the second is like there's a reason they put a bag full of all those weird organs out of the turkey. Like that goes in the stuffing. Like you should be using that in the stuffing, and most people just throw it away. But you will make a much better. And don't tell people you put it in there. I never do, but I always put it in there, and they're always like, "This is the most amazing stuffing I've ever had." And it's like that's because you're eating turkey kidney. That's what you don't know. So that's that's my take on side dishes. In terms of my parallel on the side dish, this is going to be a weird one, and this is Jeremy and I are, for the listeners, are both huge fans of Derek Thompson. He's got a great Substack. He's co-author of the book Abundance, which many people know about. His Substack's super worth reading, and he was talking about AI in one of his posts and the amount of capital that's being invested in AI, and likened it to a historical investment that was made in America on a historic investment that was made in America on the railroads and building the transcontinental railroads. And he mentioned a book called Railroaded about the investments that America and companies made in the railroads back in the 1860s, 1870s. So I thought, oh, that sounds like a really interesting book. I'm gonna pick that up. So I've been reading it, and I mean, it is a fascinating. I literally the Gilded Age and this time period is something I knew very little about. Like I did not know that for Lincoln to go from Illinois to New York when he won the presidency, it took him 4 days, 5 different railroads, 5 different trains. I mean, it was like, it's really fascinating to kind of think back to this period, but like the financial shenanigans that these capitalists used in order to finance a railroad was just incredible. And I mean, it feels so familiar, but also just it's different because of the time period. But the one thing I read, and Jeremy, and the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I know you'd really appreciate this. One way that the government helped support finance the railroads was, they're going to build these railroads in the middle of nowhere, right, cutting across the country, and the land that surrounded the railroad was quote unquote the government's. Now, let's be clear, it was technically Native Americans' lands, except they just didn't have title. If only First American truly was First American title, then they probably wouldn't have been given away by the government. But in any case, they own the land. So what the government did was they had this really creative solution where they would give the railroads plots of land along the railroad for free. The thought being is that the government would continue to own the plots of land next to those plots of land and sell them at twice the cost they were selling them for. So again, to the government's perspective, we could have sold all this land for a penny an acre, whatever it was. Instead, we're now going to sell half the land for 2 pennies an acre. We're going to make the same amount of money, but because the railroads are building a railroad and building a quote unquote place in the middle of nowhere, it'll just drive profits. And so the reason I figured you'd like this, Jeremy, is one thing you often talk about is how we shouldn't think of housing as just housing. We should think of housing as an economic driver, like it's connected to other things. And if you make investments in housing, it can return in different ways. So, as another example of this, one of the policy proposals at Ivory on the panel was from the city of Muskegon out there in your part of the world out there in Michigan, and they're doing a TIF structure, which is tax incentive financing, which basically says I've got a piece of vacant land. I'm not earning anything on it from a tax perspective. If I'm willing to subsidize something being built there and now I'm earning tax revenue, I can think of that future tax revenue as a way to subsidize the cost of building something on the land. So it's just a more creative way to think about really anything that the government gets involved in. And what I mean by that, and I saw a great quote, like it's the government's job to build bridges to nowhere because the government's the only thing that can actually make nowheres somewhere. And the same idea I think really applies to housing, which is like, make these investments in building housing and then do that on the basis of all of the things that you will get from creating housing, the jobs, the economic stimulus. And I think there's, all the way back to the time of the railroads, a very interesting way of doing that. And I think that still echoes through today.
Yes, I think it does, and I think actually thinking about it that way is a really good way to kind of reboot the mindset on housing and say, "Look, we've tried something for a really long time now." Right? We've tried LIHTC's a great example. We've tried it for a really long time. We've tried the 30-year fixed as it's currently structured, RMBS, for a really long time. And guess what? They were revolutionary and amazing products in their time. I like this idea of saying, like, what can we learn about forging a new path that we did once? Now we have to do it again. And let's figure out what we can learn from that and apply it. That's a good recommendation. So I'll check out Railroaded, but that's spot on.
Yeah, great book. Good on audio. It's a good audio book. Entertaining.
So one quick question that's not a category for us, but I'm just curious as we move on is there seems to be all this controversy around cranberry sauce, and I've never understood the controversy. There's the canned version, there's homemade version, there's like the sauce itself versus like the chutney. I'm kind of over it. I don't really have a strong opinion, but I was curious if you have your own recipe. I can mention mine, but is cranberry sauce an issue or not in your house?
I think what's controversial is the can. I, as a Midwesterner, grew up on canned everything and canned cranberry sauce. I love the fact that I can eat a fruit in the form of like a circle. But most people that I have Thanksgiving with are not into a gelatinous circular fruit dish. So
With
I
the
think there's
ribs
a
of
lot
the
of
can
controversy.
still visible
Yes,
in the
that's
of
right.
course. That's part of the charm, I think. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the main dish, the turkey. People are deep frying it, and we're probably our algorithms are all gonna get the, classic burning your deck down from deep frying a turkey videos that make the rounds on Instagram this time of year. But there's the, cooking it at getting up at 5 in the morning to cook it. There's the deep frying it. Now air fryers are probably big enough for some. What's what's your turkey preference? And then of course you've got the serving of it. So do you take the drumstick? You got the dark meat, you got the white meat, but then also give us your turkey topic as well. We'll have you go first on turkey, John.
All right. Well, for me, turkey always tastes the same. I mean, people do these weird things with turkey, and it's like maybe makes a slight difference. A deep fried turkey is substantially better than any other turkey. So you know, you put it in a paper bag with. I don't care what you do. You deep fried turkey is going to taste better. Okay, everything tastes better fried. My brother-in-law, who actually I've mentioned on the show before in the context of the Mike U episode, because he works for Vesta, deep fried a turkey for me, and it was the best turkey I've ever had. So I'm a unhealthy eater, so it's dark meat deep fried. If I'm going to do it on Thanksgiving, so that's me. My main course, and this is like so central to a lot of what I'm thinking about right now, is construction financing, and I've been talking to folks about Fannie Mae's construction to perm program. For many listeners may not know this because they made some changes, and they I think they're incremental. And I applaud them for doing something. They extended the age of docs, which means that your credit score is not going to run out on you in the middle of construction, so you have to re-underwrite borrowers. They're trying to do something along hedging the interest rate risk, which takes care of another one of the major issues of doing construction financing. But they need to go back to the program they had in the early 2000s, where they would buy a loan on day one and put it on balance sheet during the construction period, and then securitize it after construction was at some point, quote unquote, complete. The benefits of this are tremendous in the industry, but they're not enough. The other major challenge is today, when a lender does a renovation program or construction program, the lender is ultimately managing the construction process. They're using technologies like Land Gorilla or Built with a BUILT, great companies that do an amazing job of managing these processes. But the risk sits on the lender. And this is just inane. The lender knows, like, the lender has to hire staff to do it. What it means is, like, only certain lenders can do it at a very high cost internally because they have to have these departments, and then every other lender is not involved. So I don't think that this industry you can make changes in the margin, but until every lender can make a construction loan and not have to worry about construction risk, it's never going to get to the consumer, because everybody the consumer deals with, from realtors to loan officers, if you even suggest that you're going to do a renovation before you move in or a full construction, they are all telling you that is a stupid idea. And so and even if you do convince them, you'll feel like it's a stupid idea because it's so hard and complicated. So Fannie Mae holds the key to fixing this. They can and they should do it. And if they did, here's the remarkable thing. A wonderful person from Zillow, Jen Butler, folks may know her. She leads their government relations team. Brilliant woman. She pointed out that 17% of the listings today on Zillow are for land. And I was floored by that stat, and I honestly couldn't believe it. I went back. I had to go into Zillow and search to see, like, how much land. It is incredible how much land is for sale. So, but you as a consumer, if you find a plot of land and you decide, I'm going to buy that land and I want to build on it, it is just nobody wants to do that. And by the way, when you're searching on Zillow, you're usually looking at a price range, and land does not show up in that price range because it's usually much cheaper to buy just the land. And so I think there's an opportunity for the industry if Fannie Mae could create a program similar to what it's had before, but with some bells and whistles to make it better for lenders, to really take advantage of the land we have as a country and let people go build. Like, let's stop beating up the builders to go build. Let people go find their own builder and go build homes.
Yeah,
All right, that's it. That's my turkey.
that's it, man. That is the turkey. I had the same note written down. We hadn't compared notes before this, John, and I had the same thing, which is like turkey has to be supply in our conversation. Supply. We've had how many people now confirm that, hey, you can do everything you want, playing with rates and playing with the mortgage, but if we don't do anything for supply, you're not going to have a meaningful impact on first-time home buyers being able to afford their first home. And the other thing that is implicit in what you're talking about that makes me so excited is we can figure out a way, based on what you said, to incentivize the right square footage. because one of the biggest things that we found is that the rise in home prices was also because it made more sense to build larger square footage homes that would sell at a bigger number. As long as you're bringing everything to the lot to build a house, you might as well get the biggest number you can get. That makes the most sense. So we've got to make it make sense to build starter homes at the square footage we want on these places. And that's as much a land question as it is a construction type question. And to your point, they want to build. The private market wants to build. It's a matter of making it make sense. And it's funny to hear you say that maybe something as simple as the search parameters on Zillow was excluding 1 in 6 or 1 in 5 opportunities from people. If 17% is a crazy high number, when I heard that, I was like, wait, 1 in 6 listings is land. But something as simple as like search filters meant most people weren't seeing it, even before you get to the problem of how hard it is. So that is the main event for sure.
Yeah, and what I'm playing with in my mind too is if you get enough builders interested, you can start saying, well, take land listings on Zillow and come up with a spec home and make it look real in AI and make the listing the full all-in cost of everything versus just the land. Because that changes the sort of impressions you get of buying land. It's like, no, I'm not buying land. I'm buying this whole thing, which is what you want people to feel like. And anyway, I think there's a real opportunity there.
Yeah, if companies really say that they wanna own the full experience, then own the full experience. Like, weave your digital experience together to help people do that. But my so I was gonna go back to a lesson I learned from Bob Walters, who was a guest on Housing Insiders, and you should find that episode and listen to it. But I asked him when he took over Rocket Mortgage, what was the biggest surprise assuming CEO? You've been at the company 25 years, now you're CEO. Were there any surprises left? And he said the biggest surprise and the biggest difference making that jump from a senior leader to the CEO was having to say something 7 times to get the whole organization to understand it. That you can't say something once. You have to continue to beat the drum and say the message over and over again to get your organization where you want them, all thinking the same way. So I'm going to beat that drum, John. Jobs that create houses, jobs that create houses. If we incentivize factory built and offsite construction jobs, and we incentivize people to create those jobs in places where we can then distribute housing product, maybe the full house, but also the suppliers, also everything that you would need, we can actually create jobs that those themselves have economic output into the community. And then their product also has tremendous economic output, as you've already pointed out. Amazon's already done the hard work telling us where all the distribution centers need to be around the country. The government now gets to do the easy thing, which is incentivize the production of home building facilities near those. And now we know how we need to reach the biggest number of people in the communities where people want to live. If you're ordering things off of Amazon to your house, then you're in somewhere, I promise, where somebody wants to live. And so we need more houses in that community. Let's incentivize it's jobs that create houses, and we're going to put them in places we already know reach the most number of American communities.
Look, man, I mean, preaching to the choir here, as you know, I think the idea of industrialized construction and sort of the benefits it does create by creating real meaningful jobs, lessening the reliance on labor that's coming really mainly from immigration, which has dried up, is a really really great way to create housing. And the one thing too that I was thinking a lot about, just to kind of go back to this construction on a blank plot of land, like a lot of homes in this country are basically done. They shouldn't exist anymore. And the idea of tearing it down and building a new home is like, again, nothing that you can really even think about, but we should be doing it in a lot more places. And to your point, I mean, a lot of these places where these distribution centers are close to cities that used to be industrialized places that have rundown homes. So if you could just simply say, well, don't imagine living in the home as it exists today. Imagine this home swept off this ground for 20,000, replaced by a home out of this factory that's incredible and well made and much less expensive than building it from sticks. Like, that creates more demand for these factories, which is really the key. Like, you need these factories to have scale, and bringing jobs and creating new centers will bring scale, but also tearing down homes and replacing homes is another way to kind of create even more demand for housing that comes out of these sort of futuristic factories that you and I will hopefully invest in someday.
That's right, and you've talked about a bunch of things that would require jobs in and of themselves. We're talking I'll just use 2 very quick examples, and then we'll move on, but one, we talked to a home builder, a factory home builder in Germany, who co-located their facility with Audi, Porsche, and Volkswagen in the same city, knowing that there was already robotic manufacturing talent there, there was already robotic manufacturing parts there, and that makes a lot of sense. What I was surprised to hear, but goes to job creation, they have 65,000 truckloads a year going in and out of that factory, taking the product on flatbeds to the places where they're gonna build these multifamily buildings. Now theirs are 7 to 10 foot or 7 to 10 story buildings, excuse me. So, flat packed and sent out. But that's 65,000, again, as you know, living here in Detroit, the Teamsters would love that. The truckers would love that. 65,000 truckloads coming out of a facility. Let's do it. So I think we have to start measuring the job creation even larger than just the facility itself. I think that's a key piece for me as well. And then the other thing I would mention is just real quick, Connect Homes. I don't believe operational anymore. Home building startup in San Bernardino, in order to prove your point, in 2019, bought a house in LA County in downtown LA. The house cost $800,000 because of the lot, tore it down, built their house on it, brand new, modern design out of the factory, $800,000. So they're all in at 1.6. They sent an appraiser in for an independent appraisal with no knowledge of the building type, and it appraised for 2.3. So they had $700,000 of equity straight away just from being able to get rid of that 1952 build, put theirs on land, and just ask somebody, what's the market value of this today? So it wouldn't be like that everywhere, but I think it deserves its moment to say, how do we do this? And your
I
point's
love
well.
that story. I hadn't heard that before. That's really fascinating. The only thing that you did not mention is how you like your turkey done.
Oh, I didn't mention dark meat, and I kind of want to be the one to get the leg. I don't make it a thing where I have to, but if it's there and nobody else did, I'm definitely taking the leg.
Yeah, all right, I totally get that. All right. Well, should we take it home? What's next here?
I think here's what I think we should do, John. We should jump to dessert. We've had the full meal. We have everything there. I was going to throw one other wild card category at you. The bread is sometimes important to people, the rolls and so I'll just mention, the Hawaiian roll wins for me, but my Hawaiian roll was just going to be a little and just a quick hit topic about, let's already get rid of the HUD code chassis requirement. It was just going to stay in supply. It was just a little side dish or a side piece to the turkey was just, let's update our building codes. And my bread was just going to be that. Let's get rid of the chassis requirement for starters, but let's get to modern universal building codes that we can actually do what we talked about in the turkey section.
Yeah, bread and topic. 100% just 2 thumbs up on both.
Let's
This
just
is
do
like
that.
a passion project of mine, and building codes are necessary for your turkey to work. Building code reform, and so 100%.
All right,
All
so
right,
let's end on
dessert.
dessert. You can't talk about Thanksgiving without talking about pie, pumpkin pie, apple pie, whether you like it with ice cream or not, whether there's a different type of pie that you want to put into your top choice. So, for me, I'm going to say I often don't have room left for pie. I'll wait a couple of hours and try, and if I try, it's usually pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie is my favorite, but often it'll be the next day. Friday for me, especially Friday morning, pumpkin pie before anything else on Friday morning is more fun for me than after dinner, but always pumpkin. How about you?
Um, my answer is pecan pie, and I want because I do love that. Pumpkin pie is my number one for sure, but pecan pie is the only pie that you can pronounce. I think 3 different ways.
Yeah, pecan for sure is one.
Yep. Pecan, what's the other way?
Pecan,
I
I
know I've
think
heard
they
it
say
through it.
pecan pie. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, anyway,
Excellent,
there's
good choice. And that one lends itself to ice cream pretty easily too. I think that's a good
very
vanilla
easily.
ice cream combo.
Yeah, for sure.
So I wanted to throw out something again, innovation, a thing I've been passionate about for a while, which is the resident facing REIT. And I only use the word REIT because it's a structure most people know. But as we start talking about housing supply in the turkey section, I think we have a bunch of great ways to build houses. I also think we need to be thinking differently about building density building vertically, and new ownership models that go around that. So my dessert is just, can we crack the code a little bit on, well, I can only build this building this way, and everybody in it has to be a renter. Or I build it this building this way, and everybody in it's a condo. I think we need to start thinking differently about that. One way to think about it is, does it need to be all or nothing in terms of ownership or rent in a particular building? So that's my first question. My second question is, do you actually want to own your unit? Do you care? Is what you really want equity in an appreciating asset over 10, 20, or 30 years? And if what you really want, whatever percentage of the consumer market wants equity in an appreciating asset over 10, 20, or 30 years, I think we need to start thinking about putting them into structures where an entire portfolio of homes, an entire building or series of buildings are owned by a structure that you're then earning shares in, and that you can then acquire equity in, like I said, a REIT, because that's the structure we know today. But you can actually build your equity portfolio off of something slightly broader and more diverse than just your unit or just your home. And I don't think it's going to work for everyone. I'm not pitching it as a 100% solution to the market, but I actually think there's a large enough market of people who think this way and understand that, you know what? I'd much rather live in a building that somebody else helps me take care of, and I still get to see, thanks to technology and data transparency, I still get to see what I'm earning as I work towards a 10, 20, or 30-year horizon. So still competing with the same horizon as a mortgage, but doing it in a way that's a little bit more innovative and hopefully accessible, so I can kind of get it on my terms instead of on your terms as a lender.
Yeah, I mean, I love these ideas of breaking down ownership and renting into kind of different models. I mean, what you're describing sounds almost like a co-op, because a co-op is a very strange form of housing, but it's different in the sense that the co-op is like it doesn't stay with the co-op. I guess is kind of how your idea would work.
The way I would the thing I wanna take some things from a co-op and then get rid of others. So, for instance, a lot of co-ops are managed by the residents. I don't think that's a strong way to do it. So, having a property manager that is operating a fund of which the building is part of is a much smarter way to, like, run that asset and manage that asset, but you want people to feel like owners because you want that owner mentality, of people taking care of their building and their community and their unit. And so what I'm saying is we'll keep the co-op ownership structure legally, and we'll get rid of the management structure where the residents have to elect each other to a board that then makes decisions about the asset. And so it's more of that, like, let an asset manager do that, but you get to participate as a shareholder, just like private equity would, just like a corporate balance sheet would, or just like any other real estate investor would today.
Okay, I think that's a great idea. Let me talk about my pecan pie idea, which usually, especially at a friendsgiving at somebody else's house, it's late. I've been drinking a little bit. My kids are getting grumpy, and it's time to go. So I have to take the dessert to go. That happens more often than I'd like. But because the dessert becomes portable, my suggestion will be talk about portable. And Bill Pulte has been out there talking about assumable mortgages and portable mortgages, and Jeremy, you and I were just recently talking about portable mortgage as a concept, which is funny because a lot of people are talking about how do we make future mortgages portable, which is silly because it's not. The whole purpose of making mortgages portable is that people living in homes today that are stuck there and can't move, we want to create some ability for them to move, either to move up or to move out or whatever, to kind of create the sort of trickle down effect that economists talk about. And that's the whole point. So we want to actually make old, existing mortgages portable. How do we do that? The thing I've been sort of talking about that I've heard some ideas percolating around is by unwinding MBS. Would it be possible to take a portfolio of 2.5% MBS and unwind them, take off the guarantee, and then you, as the sole owner of a pool of whole loans, could then make those whole loans portable, let people move, profit off of that transaction. And there's lots of ways to do that. I want to get into it right now. but make enough profits such that when you repackage the loans together and resell them, you'll sell them certainly not as a good price as what you bought them for. You'll lose a little money on that part of the transaction. Maybe you can make money on the other part of the transaction. So I think that's doable. It requires a balance sheet and some willpower of like doing all the legal work, so on and so forth. But in my opinion, if you could do that at a meaningful scale, it would be a huge unlock to the industry and a huge way of addressing the housing supply. It sounds odd, but just by letting people move, I think it really will unlock particularly starter home supply.
I agree. I think you explained it exactly right. I had the same question come up recently where somebody said, assumable, portable, are they the same? Are they different? And the way I described it, which is probably too simple of an explanation, but I was like, look, in one case, the mortgage stays with the house. In one case, the mortgage stays with the person. And so in assumable, it stays with the house. And in portable, it stays with the person, but it's a right now problem. I think your point's a very important one. It's a right now problem. It's just to unlock the supply that is frozen because we delivered the lowest 30-year fixed rate loans that we ever had, and nobody wants to lose the advantage that they gained in 2020 or 2021. So it's a right now problem. It's not a go forward problem. It does create supply, and to your point, there's a lot of really difficult mechanisms around the securitization market, but it will, I think, also be a stronger mover than assumable. To be clear, I think it benefits the exiting homeowner, which has some public relations issues around it. Like the people who already have all the wins are getting another win in some people's minds. But I think
Mhm.
you and I agree that you have to overcome that perception in order to unlock the types of houses you mentioned and the ones that we want back on the market. And with
Yeah.
assumable, you have a much kind of you have a lot of barriers to entry to first time home buying today that still exist with assumables. I think they go down. We reduce those barriers with portable.
I totally agree. Well, look, unassumable too, by the way, our mutual friend Ronick, who has a company called Rome, ROAM, who, FHA and VA loans, which are a huge percentage of existing loans, are actually assumable. If you assume a loan, the challenge becomes you need more financing to get to where your down payment is. And something I recently heard is like, why can't the GSEs step in and create a second lien product designed specifically to help people assume FHA loans, which I think is a creative idea. So portability, we took my dessert home, consumed it, assumed it, um,
Well
and there
done.
ends the
That's it. Yeah,
meal.
the portable, I was gonna say, you stayed on theme all the way through the end, and I really appreciate that. So, that's our Thanksgiving meal. We like to end with one quick hot seat question each week, John, and so I thought maybe I'd throw one at you real quick, even though we've, already spent over an hour together, and thank you for listening, for this whole time if you're still with us. But my one hot seat question for you was, I could only think of one Thanksgiving movie, like truly Thanksgiving movie, and that was Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And I like watching it, to get in the spirit of the season, trying to get home. If you haven't seen it, Steve Martin and John Candy, and Steve Martin's trying to get home from New York to Chicago in time for Thanksgiving. It's a great flick, and I wasn't sure if you've ever seen it, if you like it, and also if you could think of a different one that I had forgotten.
I mean, Steve Martin, John Candy, it's a fantastic movie. So I'm glad you mentioned it. The only thing I'll say is you're missing the Charlie Brown obviously has a
Oh, sure.
Thanksgiving movie, so that's kind of with kids a good one to bring up. I will say for me personally, Thanksgiving, and this will get to my question for you. Thanksgiving kind of marks the beginning of Christmas for me, and Christmas movies for me and my kids mainly is Elf. So it's time to start watching Elf, 3 times a week once Thanksgiving ends. So, but my question for you to put you on the hot seat is it an appropriate time to put out Christmas lights the weekend after Thanksgiving, the weekend before? Do you have to wait? Assuming you celebrate Christmas, which I think you do, like when does that decorating officially start for you?
I have had to decide and make strong opinions on this because my family wants to start celebrating Christmas as early as possible. So I've personally taken the position that the day after Thanksgiving it begins. And in fact, I'll go even a step further. I think when you're done with the meal, Santa already came through at the very, very end of the parade. So really what they're telling you is when you're done with your meal, you can start then, but not before. So I don't like
All
to
right.
infringe on Thanksgiving. I don't like to infringe on Thanksgiving. I like my Thanksgiving to feel like that the week of and leading up to it. But then Friday morning, you want to start putting lights out, go for it.
In the case of this being a Thanksgiving Day episode, we will end with Merry Christmas. and and I think that's going to do it for the episode. If you're still here, we'd love to hear from you. We threw out a lot of topics at you, but email us at podcast@thehousinginsiders.com. If you like what you're listening to, please just leave us a review. If you don't like what you're listening to, please do not leave us a review.
And always subscribe and share our episodes so that we can make more of them. And thank you, Keenan Chen, for our music.